everyone, my name's Louise. I work for BMT as a principal marine scientist, and we have been working with UWA to support on the environmental impact assessment of the M4 installation and also with the engineering design of the mooring for the M4 installation. So I won't go too much into the background, you've covered that pretty well. The device is planned for installation for a period of 3 to 5 months in 2023-2024. And UWA are planning to use that technology to perform under various ocean conditions to supply clean energy. So the wave energy device is installed via quaternary anchor leg mooring with a mooring buoy and a clump weight configuration. The quaternary lines are about 120 metres moored to the seabed attached to a clump weight, and the mooring arrangement will weather vane around a clump weight of 120 metres radius. And the anchors and the clump weight total seabed interaction will be an area of about 48 metres squared. So a site description in terms of an environmental setting, it's about 600 metres southeast of Seal Island in King George Sound in about 30 metres of water. The areas surrounding it have been zoned as environmentally sensitive areas. Historically, there's been regional seagrass cover loss from historical catchment inputs, mainly nutrients, and over the years that decrease in seagrass cover from about 1970, 1980 has come back to those pre-existing levels to around about 20% now, where it was about 80% loss before. It's also located in a Department of Water Environmental Regulation Waterway Management area, and that requires potential permitting. Department of Water Environmental Regulation have various areas throughout the state of WA that they protect for water conservation purposes. So any interaction or decline to water quality, they have an interest in assessing that impact. So our role was to prepare an environmental impact assessment and management plan to assess the risk of the M4 installation. The environmental impact assessment and management plan considered relevant legislation and guidelines, which ranged from the Environmental Protection Act through to Underwater Maritime Heritage Conservation Acts, looked at biological, physical and social environmental aspects, the potential environmental impacts associated with the project, any stakeholder consultation and monitoring and management planned. So the Environmental Protection Authority in Western Australia has a framework where it assesses proposals that comes through their door, and that's against key environmental factors. And so for the wave energy converter device, the key factors were identified to be benthic communities and habitat, whether that's a direct impact from installation of anchors or an indirect impact from generation of turbidity during installation, marine environmental quality, which is also an increase in increase in water quality and turbidity, potential release of contaminants from the power takeoff unit and any introduced marine pests. Marine fauna, so impacts to threatened and migratory species. There's a couple of whale species that like to hang out in the waters down there. And social surroundings in terms of impacts to commercial and recreational fisheries, public safety, visual amenity, navigational hazards, and also heritage, both European, maritime and Aboriginal. So in terms of technical studies, UWA commissioned a benthic habitat survey, and there was two. One was done in May, June of last year, and then early this year, and it involved a combination of side scan, sonar and ground truthing effort. So the first survey looked at the broader area, which Hugh showed before, which was that red square, and the cover of seagrass within that region. And it was sort of found that in the sort of southwest corner, the cover was more dense and it dissipated towards the northeastern corner. So then a second survey was commissioned to focus on that area in the northeastern corner to identify areas of benthic habitat and avoidance of that habitat. So it was chosen that the northern area is the most likely location for deployment to avoid impacts to seagrass. And seagrass are protected marine native vegetation. They have an important ecological role in the ecosystem from a carbon sink perspective, and also a coastal protection element and an important nursery for significant fisheries throughout the area. So avoidance of impacts to seagrass is always the preference, and we looked at the assessment of species thresholds in terms of any potential burial, and also the low time period for installations, about 3 weeks, and there's ecological windows that seagrass can withstand for certain turbidity generated activities. So this is just a little diagram of the kind of information that was presented. So you can kind of see the benthic habitat on the far left, in the green polygon, the site location, the digitalised version of that habitat, and then the side scan sonar, and the northeastern corner being the area of least cover. So marine fauna, there are 3 species of whales that like to nurse, calf and feed and forage down in the King George Sound of Albany. So assessment of impact in terms of an entanglement risk and also collision and also underwater noise were looked at through the impact assessment process. The mooring lines have been designed, so they're quite thick chain to avoid any kind of entanglement risk. The layout has been designed to avoid an entanglement risk. And the key probably factor here is that it's avoiding seasonal migratory windows. In terms of marine environmental quality, there's a potential release of contamination from a small use of low operational hydraulic fluids. So the power takeoff unit, I think it requires about 26 litres of hydraulic fluids. So the engineering design looked at housing that in a waterhouse container and then a further sump house to contain any kind of a spill, and then a catastrophic scenario was looked at in the impacts assessment to look at potential dilution within the receiving environment if that was to, in the unlikely event, enter into the environment. And so and also consideration of biofoulant, so when you put anything in the water, things like to grow in it, so using environmentally friendly products for that biofoulant application. Social surroundings was also looked at, so assessment of recreation, fisheries, public safety, amenity, navigational safety and heritage. And UWA has done a really good job at stakeholder consultation, engaging with the local community from the very beginning and through all layers of the community, so they've done a significant amount of work there. And so for the implementation of the device, there'll be a monitoring and management framework developed to ensure the key environmental factors that have been identified and the values of those are maintained. We'll develop monitoring and management triggers and targets and responses, and overall the outcome of the impact assessment was that this project presents a relatively low risk to the environment. Thank you.